I'm on the floor of PDAC 2020. It's day one, and joining me now is Charles Dumbrille. He's Chief Risk Officer with IN-D-TEL International. Thank you so much for joining me, Charles.
Afternoon, Scott. It's great to be here.
Okay, so it is day one, as I've mentioned. There's some interesting happenings coming up in Burkina Faso that you've just mentioned to me prior to the start of this interview. Can you just run me through what's going on there? We have spoken about Burkina Faso recently, and it is a topic of interest for Canadian investors.
Certainly. The last time we spoke in Vancouver, I mentioned that I wouldn't be surprised if there was an attack occurred tomorrow. The militant group JNIM had their announcement for unifying their coalition on March 2nd. The Ouagadougou attack in March 2018 was on the anniversary of this announcement. JNIM did not allude to the date, but did respond to a notable attack against them. On February 24th, the French military announced that they, quote-unquote, neutralized up to 170 militants in Mali and Niger during the month of February. Some jihadists conduct attacks on important anniversaries. This has not been noted as a trend in recent years, but with the recent French announcement, this could motivate militants to stage attacks to demonstrate resilience. It is possible for a high-profile attack in the coming days or weeks. The militants have been focusing their efforts by entrenching themselves in rural areas, creating a notable lull in an urban attack. And so a target could be anything from security forces to infrastructure to where expats are hanging out within the city centers. An attack would elevate their profile amongst other militants. Now, I also mentioned that they have an election planned for November, but it is most likely to be moved. They are not prepared for this election. The parties are still very fragmented. And if it's anything like what we saw in Mali's elections, where militants were attacking polling stations and electoral offices, this will be the same case in Burkina. The threat is increasing towards the south and the west. They've already very much present in the north and the east. We saw this with the Semifo attack last autumn. And Semifo is now recognizing the risk and is now building an airstrip. In the meantime, they're using a 10-person helicopter to fly employees in and flying them out. And they plan to have their site that was attacked up and running in Q4 of this year, 2020. Security needs to have a seat at the table for these incidences. If you look at Northern Canada and a project there is no question that employees will be flown in and flown out. It is just the cost of doing business. But when you're in a hostile area where there's conflict, like in Burkina, it is considered labeled a security cost, an added security cost that they could avoid. And so it goes back to my point that you need to have security at the table, like other executives making decisions and being able to address these issues.
Is the situation in Burkina Faso declining to such a level that perhaps as a jurisdiction it could become out of bounds for investors? Or is this something that can be salvaged? Can investors still look at that jurisdiction where there is a lot of gold mined, by the way, and still see opportunity? Or is it just becoming too much?
It's going to take a long time for it to get back. Any investors that are in there now, the government is very grateful for. It's a shame to see that moved out and see things deteriorate even more. It is a different tune than similar interviews during PDAC last year, where there was statements that Burkina was a great place to be mining in, but it's still a very tough situation and will continue to be for the coming months.
And to put that in context, at PDAC 2019, that was shortly after a Canadian miner had actually lost his life. And now we haven't had news like that, but yet the situation has declined so much in the meantime.
Yes, it's continuing. You see it in other neighboring countries as well, where it's along border skirmishes. It is just a continually monitoring. It is also questionable if there is a major city attack, then will that bring in other international forces to try and control the region?
And speaking of elections, so the last time we spoke, we also spoke about neighboring Ghana, which has been described, you've described as like a good kid in a rough neighborhood. Can you give me any updates on what's going on there?
Certainly. The elections are still planned and most likely follow through in November 2020. Elections in West Africa are not like in North America where they're planned almost years in advance. So there's still a lot to be waiting for as we get closer to November 2020. The elections are politically polarized. The current president, Nane Akufo-Addo, is running up against the former president, John Mahama. Either candidate is good for the economy. Any security incidences in the country are small scale and will not affect the investment environment. Illegal mining is an issue in the country. The illegal miners are called glamsies, and they are currently trying to solve that issue with an operation called Operation Vanguard that they've brought back. I moderated a panel this morning on artisanal small-scale mining and illegal mining and looked at various solutions in the ways to manage it, and I think it's a problem that cannot be ignored. It's a growing problem, and it's gaining a lot more attention with the investment industry, and I think that will help change some things around if we can get more government involvement and find some of these solutions. The former president, John Mahama, promises to regulate illegal mining if he's elected. His brother is the largest local mine owner, and so it is a plus for him if he is elected for the mining industry. And as I've mentioned before, Ghana is stable and will continue to be stable.
And before we move on, can you just maybe give us the cliff notes on what are some of the suggestions that came out of the panel that you moderated?
There is a no one-size-fits-all. It depends on if there is criminal activity in the area and how much so. There are some very innovative programs out there that are able to give back to the communities, to the local miners. We need to understand that this is people's livelihoods, and if they don't have this mining opportunity for them, then they may have to lead to something else or another criminal aspect that is another strain on the local community or the government.
And so staying with Africa, there's been some happenings in Tanzania. So they have an election that is apparently scheduled for 2020, but there's not all that much material out there about it. Just for readers will know that Tanzania was recently ranked as the least attractive jurisdiction in the world in regards to investment by the Fraser Institute's recent 2019 survey of mining companies. So a lot of miners here at PDAC have had things to say about the Fraser Institute, but it seems to be that following the news from the past few years, the Tanzanian government has been in tax disputes with mining companies there, namely Barrick Gold. And it just seems to be that they seem to have a adversarial relationship with the miners there. It's also been accused of having high resource nationalism. So what's the background that you can give us for Tanzania? What can investors expect in 2020 when there's an election that we seem to be in quite a shortage of news coverage of?
The election is planned for October, and that date stands, and you could say it is already in motion for that election to take place. The president, John Magufuli, is standing for his second term. He represents a party called the Chama Cha Mapinduzi Party, also known as the CCM Party, which has won every election since the multi-party election system was introduced. Now, Magufuli's tenure has been full of some interesting developments with restrictions to oppositions, using particularly intimidation. Since 2016, they've banned all political gatherings of all kinds. That means even a private meeting in a hotel room would be banned and that they could come in and break up. There have been 3 to 4 assassination attempts of the opposition. The elections will show how weak the opposition is in the country. They are very restrictive with their media freedom. The LGBT community is targeted. They attack HIV clinics. The mining laws that have been passed, where any mine needs to have mining laws that have been passed, or they need to have either government ownership or a Tanzanian citizen owner as part of that project. You might start seeing that in the oil and gas side as well. There currently, you can say that there is no fear of nationalism, as he isn't a populist, and he doesn't want to scare away investors. He knows that is where the opportunity lies. The hot button issue is Zanzibar. It has its own culture and its identity, and it's seeking its own autonomy. It has a history of contentious elections, including the annulment of the 2015 elections. This makes international donors and investors very nervous. The government may seek to demonstrate its more democratic credentials by showing transparency and fairness, allowing the opposition members to register as candidates. But it's doubtful that the opposition are a formidable challenge. The government controls the Electoral Commission as well as the parliament. Tanzania is quite a tough country.
And of course, the historians of us will know that Tanzania is the result of a merger of two countries, including Zanzibar. So it seems interesting that after that, decades afterwards, they're looking for autonomy again.
Yes, there isn't the concern with insurgency or militant movement from there, but they are recruiting from Zanzibar for neighboring countries in Mozambique and Somalia. So it's a one to keep monitoring, and as your readers are getting closer to October, something to keep in mind with these.
Absolutely, we'll be keeping a close eye on that. And of course, so it is now March 1 to date, this interview. The coronavirus scare has taken its toll on the markets, and looking around at crowds here, it appears to have taken a toll on attendance, although not the attendance of bottles of hand sanitizer. We are in no short supply of that, as it turns out. And a lot of companies are talking about it. They're talking about the coronavirus. It seems to have leapt out of China, and it is very well running rampant around the rest of the world. How does somebody approach something like the coronavirus while they're thinking about due diligence in this sort of industry? I mean, how can you watch out for that? It's been described as a black swan event. It's something that you simply cannot predict, and you just have to somehow be ready for it. In hindsight, seems to be, for the most part, what most people have said. The best solution, the best way to be prepared for coronavirus is to apparently have a magic ball.
It is an interesting time that we're in right now. There's always been concerns of viruses like this coming, and this is one. I am not an economist, and I'm not going to pretend that I am, just like economists should not pretend to understand international security and geopolitics. A lot of global businesses are canceling non-essential travel, which is quite telling. It is, and also with central banks hinting at a stimulus, it is hard to stimulate an economy when no one may be working. But history has shown that when there has been incidences like this, even going back to Spanish flu, that a quick recovery is possible. And so Warren Buffett may be salivating right now as the markets are down, but also looking at opportunities. It's a great time to buy, perhaps. I'm not hinting at one way or the other, but it's one that we need to continue monitoring. And right now you see that there's 60 countries that have cases, confirmed cases. The latest numbers this afternoon were nearly 87,000 confirmed cases and over 7,000 cases outside mainland China.
And the last time I just checked, just an hour ago or so, it seemed as though we're at an even 3,000 deaths globally from the coronavirus, although something like 2,800 of them are still in mainland China. So it still seems to be, for the most part, a Chinese phenomenon. But the news coverage, as we all know, has been that it seems to be moved to community transmission in other countries, including the United States, and there are concerns about Australia as well. I haven't seen anything about Canada, but given how interconnected the economies are, we'll see how that goes. But when you're looking, when you're doing your job, when you're doing your due diligence, and you're looking into the situation around the world and how you think about your research, does something like this change how you look at situations? So we've just been talking about Africa and elections there. Does something like this alter the way that you do your homework?
Certainly. I mean, some countries do not have the support or infrastructure to handle these viruses. The virus has reached sub-Saharan Africa. This is a concern. It is in major economies in sub-Saharan Africa, which could cripple. You've got interesting challenges where in Europe they're starting to ask that they cancel large events. You're not seeing countries setting in any bans yet. You're not seeing airlines canceling yet. That is something to keep an eye on and continue to monitor.
Fantastic. Well, then I think that we will leave it there. Charles, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me.
Thank you, Scott. It's been great to be here. Best of luck with the rest of the show.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, I'm Scott Tibbles with the Investing News Network, and I've been having a chat with Charles Dumbrille, who is Chief Risk Officer with IN-D-TEL International.